Olá e bem-vindos ao Low Key Português. Hoje vamos ver muito rapidamente o verbo chamar. So, welcome to Low Key Portuguese. Today we're going to look at the verb chamar, which at its most base level means to call. But we're going to think about it as to call oneself, okay, to refer to specifically one's name or to ask somebody their name. So the way we want to think about it in its infinitive form, and this is typically how you will see verbs that tend to be reflexive, that tend to have the action refer back to the subject. So in this case, to call oneself, um, depending on who that self is. If it's myself, we're going to make some minor adjustments as opposed to if it's yourself. And today we're just going to focus on that question and answer, right? So if you want to ask somebody, what's your name? Well, there's two ways you can ask that. Well, there's more than a few ways to ask that. But using the verb chamar, we're going to think of it in two ways. We're going to think of it as, is this you formal or is this you informal? So formal, I mean like not like, putting on some three-piece suit, just interacting with people that you don't have a familiarity with, right? That you are someone, you're in a service setting, you're in a situation that there's a hierarchy involved, right? So what I mean by this, in Portugal, there may be situations where you go to the junta de freguesia or you go deal with some sort of banking situation. In those situations, and I would apply this to all service situations across the board, whether from the cafe to, applying for citizenship or dealing with civil registry, registro civil. Always, I think it's the best bet to go with the formal you for these sorts of interactions. So I would ask the question as, como se chama? Como se chama? As we see here, como se chama? And in that instance, because we're directing it straight at somebody, we're going to think of it as você. Now, we can include você, como se chama você. It's a little awkward to include that. Como se chama o senhor, the gentleman, a senhora, the lady. But como se chama is sufficient in that situation. Now, it's not really that common that you go to a cafe and ask that question, but it's possible that you may generate some conversation. And really, I would prefer, or I think it's more important that you think of it as this is something that's going to be asked of you. So somebody's going to ask you, como se chama? Because again, in those situations of service, they're definitely not going to address you as this informal you that we see here in the second question here. They're not going to refer to you as tu. Okay, that's for friends, for close family members, even for just family members in general. And there's a little caveat to that. Some families have very formal relationships when it comes to language between sons and daughters, children and their grandchildren and their grandparents. So it's largely going to depend on your situation. But I think for service settings, you're very much better off starting with a você, just to start things off on the right foot. So your best bet is to ask the question, or you're going to be asked the question, what's your name, or what do you call yourself? Como se chama? That se and the t that we see here, shut my door real quick, these are reflexive pronouns. They're the pronouns that we're going to think of as myself, yourself, his self, herself, ourselves, themselves, okay, their selves, whatever, themselves. So these are important when we're dealing with reflexivity in the verbs. Now, the question may be, which verbs are reflexive, and it largely depends on the context, right? If the action can be taken toward the subject, if I can do something to myself, there are some expressions that just don't translate well but are still going to feel reflexive in Portuguese. We can get into this at a later date, but sticking to this very basic introductory type of question, right? Hey, what's your name? Como se chama? But let's say you're out and about, you're at a club or a bar at night and you're interacting with people, and that's definitely a much lower bar, right? That's more peer-to-peer. So in that situation, to remove the stuffiness of that situation, como te chamas? So that te is the reflexive pronoun that's associated with informal you, tu. So that's a good way to think about it. Te, tu, se, você. But just note that the se can also refer to a third person, ele, he or she, ela, himself, herself. What does he call himself? Como se chama? What does she call herself? Como se chama? So those are a little bit more varied. Context will always make it clear. If you're speaking directly to someone and you're inquiring about their name, the person you're speaking directly to, it's going to be se. If you're talking about somebody else, like, hey, oh yeah, that guy over there, yeah, como se chama, or that girl over there, oh yeah, ela, como se chama, then that context will more make it so that you're speaking about each one of those entities, that third person or that second person, you, formal. Como te chamas is for those informal situations, those peer-to-peer situations. Now, the response. The response is going to be the me reflexive pronoun, which is nice for an English speaker because it's me, right? Myself, me. So that one, and we're largely going to be thinking most of the time, the world is largely seen through our own perspective. So it's very easy, I think, to see this one as being referring to the I, me. Okay, so chamo, and it's pronounced me. Okay, so it's not me, me. In European Portuguese, maybe you've heard him on Duolingo with Brazilian Portuguese. This isn't it. This is European Portuguese, and that there in me is that unstressed e that we're gonna see in many Portuguese, European Portuguese words that end in e. Okay, that sound is gonna be there. Okay, chamo-me. Okay, and it's very unstressed as you start listening to this and using it. More and more so, it's kind of just feels like air expelling, coming out of you as you finish off that. There are really no hard M's in Portuguese. At the beginning of words, typically, yes, they tend to have more of a hard M sound. Manipulo, mão, mãe, But in this situation with just an E after it, it kind of just softens that M even more. So, chamo-me. Okay, eu, so eu, chamo-me Sérgio. And if you notice, I put the eu, the I, in parentheses, because it's really not necessary. And the reason is, regular AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs in the present tense, first person, the I form, largely have this U sound at the end of it. Chamo, eu chamo-me. So in essence, this eu becomes superfluous. We don't really need it anymore because this version of chamar, chamo, can only be in reference to this I that is speaking. So eu chamo-me, or simply chamo-me, and my name is Sérgio, chamo-me Sérgio. And I just wanted to add a couple of things here on how we typically are using self-referential ways to ourselves. We refer to ourselves in the third person almost. When we're speaking in European Portuguese, that's a slight deviation from Brazilian Portuguese, where they don't typically add the article prior to a name. So I'm going to skip kind of to the last example here. So here I'm using the verb ser, the verb to be, to say that I am Sergio, right? I am Sergio. So in English, there's no I am the Sergio. It kind of sounds interesting in some ways, but no one says that, right? So eu sou o Sérgio is the typical way that European Portuguese speakers are going to introduce themselves if they choose to use the verb ser rather than chamar, the I call myself. So eu sou o Sérgio. Okay, so o Sérgio, if somebody's talking about me, hey, did you call Sérgio? Chamaste? Did you call? So see that this verb to call isn't just about referring back to ourselves as the name that I call myself, but it can be used in the context as, hey, did you call me? To call someone, chamar. So, or to call like across the room, chama, you say, chama, tô te chamar, I'm calling you. So, chamo-me Sérgio, eu sou o Sérgio. So, in both instances, I'm kind of referring back to myself as if I'm external to myself. O Sérgio, the Sergio, right? It doesn't make sense in English, but in Portuguese, we're typically employing that article, the, before a name. Either you're talking about yourself or about someone else. So even in the second example here, the my name, so nome is the noun name, my name, meu nome. In European Portuguese, and I believe Brazilian Portuguese too, we're going to use this article the prior to. And this is one way I think it's really important that we understand the usage of articles because they kind of set the stage for that idea of gender in our descriptions of things. So because name is the noun nome, no is another nice little E sound, nome, right? That softens that M, nome. O meu nome. So meu nome is my name, but a lot of times it's going to have this u before it, especially European Portuguese speakers. So o meu nome, the my name, doesn't translate well, and as you'll go through my videos, I'll point this out. Like, translating word for word typically is not going to function in getting out the exact expression that we want to. But a lot of times when we're referring to ourselves, we're going to include that o meu nome. And this doesn't matter if you're male or female, because really what we're referencing here is the noun name. Okay? Nome is masculine. O nome. O nome dela, her name. O nome dele, his name. It doesn't matter on the gender of the person, because with the u here and the meu, the my, just know that there's a feminine my, because we're dealing with a masculine noun, nome, name, it's o meu nome. So this is important because we're going to have this agreement in sentences in which we have articles, thus, indefinite articles, o, a, an, or some, uma, uns, umas, and then the different descriptors, adjectives, that also are going to be masculine and feminine, singular, plural, and then the nouns. Those are also going to be masculine, feminine, singular, plural. So we got to have this agreement. So the sooner we understand the different components that need to agree, you'll start using these and it'll start to become second nature to you. So a couple of components here. We have the term my, but it's masculine, singular, my, meu. O meu nome é Sérgio. O meu nome é Sérgio. So, como te chamas? Somebody may ask me as a friendly, what's your name? Como te chamas? Eu chamo-me Sérgio, or simply, chamo-me Sérgio. O meu nome é Sérgio. Eu sou o Sérgio. Okay? So, just to call out one more thing here, this is also the noun ser, the verb ser, to be. Again, this verb ser is typically for general descriptions, things that are not really going to change, right? Permanent characteristics or general characteristics that we associate with some noun. My name is definitely one of those things, right? People that know me are typically going to know that my name is Sérgio, right? So, o meu nome é Sérgio, eu sou o Sérgio. Okay, so just one more thing about these nouns. Here we have the first person of the verb ser, eu sou, and then in the one above it, you'll notice that it's in the third person, because what I'm saying is my name. I'm referring to myself, but the verb is conjugated differently because I'm really conjugating that verb ser according to the name. O meu nome é Sérgio. Okay? Eu sou Sérgio. I am Sergio, but my name is Sergio. Do you get the difference there? Same thing in English. My name is I am Sergio. So we're doing similar things. The verb to be is actually a good one in English because it's one of the verbs that does change more so from subject to subject. I am, you are, he or she is. A lot of verbs in English don't do that. I eat, you eat, he or she eats, we eat, they eat. There's one shift across all of the different conjugations. In Portuguese, we're largely going to have a shift in each line. There are some that share, você, ele, ela, as we see up here in chama, but we'll do the same thing for the plurals, the plural you, along with they, masculine, and they, feminine. So that's it for this video with the verb chamar. I hope this is helpful. We'll talk more about reflexive verbs in the future, but I just wanted to kind of introduce, especially this component about calling oneself versus my name is versus I am. A few different ways to do the same thing, to express who we are, or to ask somebody what their name is. But nonetheless, if you have any questions, please drop a comment below and I'll get to you. Até a próxima. Ciao.